Speak blessings is the title for the message. Speak blessings. In Genesis 48. So here's the story. This is the story of really how God preserved the people of Israel through Joseph's being sold into slavery and captivity by his brothers in Egypt, and then rescuing them from famine. And so his father Jacob, whom God renamed Israel, that's what we'll see here on the screen, was nearing the end of his life. And so Joseph brought his two sons to Jacob. And here's the story. In Genesis 48, verse 8. It says, when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me, so I may bless them." And then we see this exchange that takes place in Genesis 48, verse 15. It says, "Then he blessed Joseph and said, 'May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life, to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my father Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly upon the earth.' When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head, because Manasseh is the oldest child. Joseph said to him, 'No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations.'" So Jacob, or Israel, knew exactly what he was doing when he crossed over his hands and did this, as he pronounced this blessing upon what was his grandchildren. That he thought Joseph was dead, because that's the story his brothers had given to him. And so he never expected ever to see Joseph again alive, let alone see grandchildren. And in that passage, what Jacob is doing also is he adopts these two boys as his own. So when the tribes are distributed and given land in the promised land that is to come, not happened yet, these two boys are given allotments of land instead of Joseph in place of that. So that's all history for another day, another time, message-wise. But what I wanted to focus on is this practice that we see in the scriptures of fathers blessing their children and pronouncing blessings upon their children. In the next chapter, in Genesis 49, Israel goes through all of his sons, and he blesses them and prophesies over them. I included here today as an example the one that he gave and the blessing that he pronounced over Judah, because it's a significant blessing. Genesis 49, verse 8. "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's club, O Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down. Like a lion is who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. I'm sure that as Judah's hearing that, and probably the others, there's a lot of confusion over what on earth all of that means. But we know from hindsight that Judah is from which the king would come. And Judah, of all the tribes of Israel, remained true to God even through the years where Israel as a nation became divided, and the kings of what you'll see in the scriptures, you'll see them called Israel and Judah. Israel is all the other tribes, but Judah remained faithful to God till the end, until it didn't, until God gave all of his people over to foreigners, the Persians, the Babylonians. There's a lesson in that for us here today, like if you don't honor God as a nation, God may just give you over to your enemies. And that's true even for Israel. Israel doesn't get a pass. Israel needs to be obedient to God in all things. But Jacob, in this process of prophesying, God puts it in his heart to say these words and to speak of what is to come, and to speak life, speak blessing upon them. We live in a world that's almost a foreign concept. The idea of being positive, speaking life, speaking good, not evil. And so the message today really is, it's an excellent message for fathers. It's an excellent message for any parent, father or a mother, but for all of us. We have a choice when it comes to what comes out of our mouth, and particularly, and most importantly, towards the next generation, that we speak life to them, to encourage them, to give them hope for the future to come. But for anyone, really. And so I've got some scriptures that will help us to understand what God wants us to do as people, and particularly as parents, yes, and particularly as a father in that role. Ephesians. Because the words that we say, truly, they can be words of life, or they can be words of death. They can bring hope, or they can tear down, they can destroy. And so Paul says to the Ephesians in Ephesians 4, verse 29, he says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Words of encouragement from our lips to those that need to hear it. And I would suggest that those that need to hear it the most are the youngest among us. I look at the world that we live in and I shake my head. It doesn't seem to me like the world I grew up in. Like there have been some pretty horrific changes. There have been some pretty exciting ones too. I don't want to be all negative when I think about the outlook of the world. In fact, really, honestly, I'm probably an optimistic person by nature, but I also see some changes that can, and it's leading people to be very pessimistic about what is to come. And it affects, I think, young people. More than it would have me, my childhood. When I think back about my childhood, it's pretty carefree. And even when I became a teenager, even still then, when I became more aware of, the world situation, I do remember when Russia moved into Afghanistan back in the 80s. There was a little bit of intrepidness at that point, mainly because I grew up in Annapolis Royal, and I had a lot of friends that had military parents, because Cornwallis Base was still functioning at that time, and so it was real to them because they weren't sure if there would be deployments and what that would mean for their families. And so that's the only real memory that I have of something global that was causing me to have any kind of concern or fear. I feel that a lot of things exponentially changed with the events of 9/11 and what happened there. I lived in Woodstock, border town to Halton, Maine, and we used to cross that border all the time. You didn't need to do anything other than maybe pull out your driver's license and show them that you were a Canadian citizen and free cross to the border. No problem, but everything changed after that one event. And then, I went to school, no thoughts or fear of any kind of shootings, we didn't rehearse what to do in lockdowns and those type of events. It wasn't even on the radar. So our kids have it different today. And all these things have the potential to produce a pessimistic outlook about what is to come. Climate change. We hear so much about that, and we see effects of what's happening in the world because of these things. I never heard the term fire season. We only had 4 seasons when I was growing up. That wasn't one of them, but now that is a phrase that gets used often. And for the reason the world has them, not just here in Canada, but we learn and we get our kind of warnings, what Australia goes through in their season, because their seasons are reversed, is often an indicator of what's going to happen for us. And so all these things can be very negative, and so our children need positivity. They need encouragement, and they need words of affirmation. A little statement from the American College of Pediatricians state, affirmation showing approval to children for proper attitude and obedience is a crucial ingredient of successful parenting. Affirming your child's behavior sends a strong message of approval and of your pleasure regarding that behavior. Affirmation encourages children to repeat good behavior. Equally important, affirmation is an outward demonstration of your unfailing love for your child. Proverbs says what I've already said here is Proverbs 18:21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death." You say, well, what do you really mean by that? Well, we've all heard the little childhood rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names, words, will never hurt me. You might have said that when you were growing up, but you know today that that's not true. Words, bitter words, criticism, statements made in a moment of anger, statements made because of your moment of failure can have an impact upon you. And some of them are probably echoing in your memories right now. Some of them you don't forget. They'll stick with you. They'll stay with you. And so as parents, we need to be careful of the words that we say and what we pronounce over our children. James would put it like this, how serious it is and how cavalier we are sometimes with words. James says in James 3, verse 9, he says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Wow. It amazes me how easy that can come to us. In fact, we kind of live in a world that has made entertainment of it. If you've ever listened to or even know what I'm talking about when I say you can have a formal roast, you know what I mean? A celebration of someone's life. You want to honor the individual, and I've seen one not too long ago. I forget who it was for, but somebody famous in the world. They were together, and there were all kinds of celebrities there and people of renown, and they all took a chance at the mic. And what they end up doing at the mic is they make fun of the individual. They poke fun at things that the person has said or done, all in good humor, but it's not very flattering, and it's not very, yet it's done with the idea is we're just having a little bit of fun at someone else's expense, but we want to honor the individual. It kind of doesn't make sense, but that's just humanity. Sometimes we don't make sense. I remember growing up, sarcasm was the rule of the day, and we were so sarcastic in our responses to one another, and in coming up with a diss. You want to say something against somebody else, well, and somebody would have a response back to see who could one-up the other and making the other look less, smaller, all these things. And James is pointing out that really ought not to be, particularly for the follower of Jesus Christ, that we ought not to be tearing down with our words. We ought to be careful with our speech. Paul would go on and say in Ephesians 4:31, he says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Well, slander is speaking mistruth or slighting a person's character with your words. But we all know the danger of what happens when we give ourselves to rage and anger, and how often we have given over to those emotions and have said something in the midst of anger that can cause a lasting regret. Something that was said that never should have been said, something that was just said in the extreme emotion of the moment. And it's hard to pull those words back. I would say it's impossible, really. You can try to make amends for them, but the words have been spoken, and they have been heard. I have words that come to my mind every now and then, and I have to surrender them to God all over again and not allow them to carry on their impact on my life in the future. What's even worse is when I remember words that I have spoken. And even words that I know I have been forgiven for from the individual, those are moments of regret. Moments that I know that I should never have said them, but yet that's who we are. We're weak. We fall into these things that ought not to be, and so we need to be careful. Even if it doesn't come natural to us as human beings. You probably are all familiar with the little cartoon, the Peanuts cartoon comic strip in the newspapers. Was a TV show that was often on, the Charlie Brown show. And Charles Schulz created these characters. And there's a brother and sister in the show that play a unique role. They're not the superstar, that's Charlie Brown, but nonetheless, these are prominent individuals. And there's a scene where Linus asked Lucy, his sister, who in the cartoon strips, and she's got this aspiration of becoming a psychiatrist, a counselor, which is always so humorous to me because she's not the most warm and fuzzy loving person in the lineup. But Linus asks Lucy, says, why are you always so anxious to criticize me? Has this ever happened to the brothers and sisters in your household? Or maybe in your past? He says, why are you so anxious to criticize me? And she answers, I just think that I have a knack for seeing other people's faults. He says, Linus, he says, what about your own faults? Asks Linus. To which her response is, I have a knack for overlooking them. Yep. I think I know a few Lucy's. We need to be careful. James tells us in James 3 verse 5, he says, likewise, a tongue is a small part of the human body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. Well, the tongue, it is small in comparison to the other organs of the human body. But it's with the tongue that we formulate our words and we speak. And sometimes even the smallest of words can bring a heap of trouble. You can say something, and I know that I have done it, and sometimes even as I hear with my own ears the thought being verbalized, there's no way to draw it back. And you know, oh man, I really have stepped into it now with the words. Because you know you've said something that's going to hit a nerve. Because that was that was the intent. I was going to try to soften that, but sometimes, we choose words because we're intentionally trying to one-up. We're trying to get above an argument. We're trying to hurt the other person. And the moment we say it, sometimes we know that was not good. That I'm going to have to, particularly if it's people that you care for and love, and sometimes we fight and argue. The anger happens even in those relationships that are most important to us. We can say things that we never should have said. And it's like that spark. We hear of fires in forests that have been started just by a tiny spark or an ember that wasn't put out of somebody's campfire, or my brother who works for the Department of Highways was telling me last summer that they were in their summer works, and when they were just clearing brush and grass along the side of the road, they'd hit a rock with the machine, and all of a sudden there'd be a grass fire right there. And so they'd have to tend to that. Just a tiny spark. Seems harmless, but yet it can cause a heap of trouble in our lives. And so we need to be careful. Choose our words with intention and the right intentions. Paul says, Ephesians 4 verse 15, he says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. It's important to speak the truth, but it's also important to make sure it's wrapped in the context of love. Because you can be right, you can have absolute truth on side for your argument, but you can use truth as a weapon to hurt somebody. And Paul is saying that's not good. People need to know the truth. They need to hear the truth. But it needs to be presented in a way that is loving and kind, that has their best interests in mind. Romans 15:2 says, we who are strong in the faith ought to help the weak in order to build them up in the faith. We need to be the individual in their lives that will bring them further along in the development towards good. And so sometimes people need to hear the hard truth. That's true, but you have to be careful in the way that you present it. It needs to be presented in a way that is not going to cause someone to become more defensive and throw up walls, or to close their ears because they don't want to hear it. It needs to be presented in a way that will help them to lower their defenses and receive, even if it's meant to be correction. Because the end goal is to build people up. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, encourage one another and build each other up. Ken Blanchard wrote a book entitled The 1 Minute Manager. The 1 Minute Manager. And in the book, he's talking about managing people, which is not an easy thing to do. It's probably the hardest task that any boss, any manager of a business would have. And that's particularly the focus of the book, is how to be a better manager and how to get the best out of your people. And so there's a line in his book that says this: catch people doing something right and tell them. Because we know we're good at the opposite of that. We're good at seeing when they mess up. We're good at seeing when they're not doing their job properly. And often we have no hesitation to tell them when they're doing something wrong. But the other is probably more important. It's like what we said just a little while ago with affirmation. Words of affirmation affirm the good behavior, so the good behavior gets repeated. And so that's what he's really getting at. He says, if you see them doing good, make sure they know. Make sure they hear it from you, that you're pleased with their work and how they are doing it. I can remember working for a boss that I had no idea what he thought of the job that I was doing. It wasn't until I had accepted another job somewhere else and resigned that all the praise came. I can remember sharing that with somebody, Lorraine and some others. I said, I might have made a different decision had I known all of that ahead of time. But I really was in the dark and did not have enough self-confidence to actually ask him, what do you think of the work that I'm doing? I didn't feel that I had that kind of relationship with this particular boss, and so it wasn't until, and publicly, all kinds of praise came after the fact when we were on our way out. We all need encouragement. Everybody needs to be encouraged. And we need to find a way and take advantage of those moments where we see opportunities to encourage others. The Australian Institute of Professional Counselors state positive affirmations are positive statements that are repeated regularly to reinforce positive beliefs and thoughts. Encouraging children to use positive affirmations can help rewire their thinking patterns and negative self-talk. By repeating empowered and uplifting messages about themselves, such as, I am capable, I am worthy, or I am loved, children can gradually internalize these beliefs and improve their self-esteem. Because unfortunately, in the world that we live in, they hear far too often from maybe peers or others, and they will verbalize it themselves, that they are no good, that they are dumb, or they are stupid, or they are not deserving, not worthy, not capable, not able. They need people in their lives that will affirm the opposite, that they are good, that they have been created for a divine purpose, that God created them the way that they are. They are uniquely put together. They are able to achieve. There is hope for their future. God has a plan, the scripture says, for all of our futures. And it's a good plan that God has. A plan to prosper us, not to harm us, to give us a hope and a future in Jeremiah 29, if you want to look that one up. Peter Drucker has said, we need to build on people's strengths and make their weakness irrelevant. All of us. We need to find the good in the other and build on that. Encourage them to continue that, to build on their strengths, to use the things that God has wired into them to do something incredible. One last illustration here this morning. There was an annual sales conference, and an award was being presented to the outstanding salesperson of the year. And the woman who had performed spectacularly that year was given the award. And in her speech, she gave all the credit to her sales manager. She stood before the crowd of 63,000 people, and she recalled the slump that she had been in 2 years before. The future looked bleak, and she was ready to resign. She had tried to quit several times, and now she's the number one salesman. Her supervisor kept reinforcing her confidence. Her voice cracked as she related the story. All those months I wanted to quit and didn't. I didn't think I had a future. But somebody believed in me more than I believed in myself. She wanted me to succeed, even more than I did. I would suggest to you today that we all need someone like that in our corners. And I want to also suggest to you, friends, that we can be that someone for somebody else, particularly the children, our children, your children, the children that you see in this church. We ought to be their champions. We ought to praise them when we see them doing something good. Go out of your way to tell them, let them know that it made an impact upon you, that you were pleased to see what they did. And when they're polite, acknowledge it. Thank them for that. Build them up. Encourage them. That's okay. Proverbs, just one last verse. You saw it. It was on the screen. It says, people learn from one another just as iron sharpens iron. There have been people in my life that have had to tell me the hard truths. Some people had no trouble telling me hard truths. And some of those, their statements were lost on me because they just didn't have love in the equation. But then there have been others that I knew cared for me and were rooting for me. And I can tell you, if you know that, if you know that that person that's talking to you has your best interests in mind, it's so much easier to listen to them when they're offering advice about things you need to change. Because I can tell you, folks, we all have things we need to change. And some things are easier to recognize and to acknowledge than others. And sometimes it takes a person with relationship. And that's the idea that the proverb is speaking about. Iron sharpening iron. Sometimes we do have to take the edges off. And sometimes we do have to have someone that's willing to address the hard things. And you can get to be that person if you have spent the time doing what I've been talking about today. Being that person that's constantly uplifting and encouraging and recognizing the good in that individual. You build credit with them so that when you recognize something that is potentially dangerous happening in their lives, you will have the credit with that individual to be able to speak to that need. If you know you don't have the credit, if you know you don't have the relationship, you're probably not the person to address the problem. It'll probably need to be someone else in their lives if it's to be received. Or if you feel God is wanting you to address the problem, well, then you better start looking for ways to find the good and encourage that individual and take the time to build relationship with them if you truly want to help them. Not an easy task, but it's an important task. I haven't always gotten it right, and I know I have regrets. And being a parent, we become parents without any instruction, any training. Maybe they have training nowadays, but not in my day. Well, the training you had was what you saw and observed from your parents, who had no training in their day, probably less than what we would have available even to us today. And, and so you're bound to make mistakes, and mistakes are hard when you're dealing with lives. So I struggle with things and have struggled with things and have learned through some things. I saw just yesterday, they were in Halifax doing a little on-the-street piece about Father's Day, and they were talking to both children and fathers about what the day meant to them. And what really stood out to me was the words of a grandfather. He was holding a grandchild in his arms, and he said, basically that. What the blessing it was to be involved in this child's life. He's the grandfather, and he said, because I made a lot of mistakes when I was being a father and was too busy with other things to spend the time that I should have. And he said, now I get to correct my mistakes and pour into this young life. And boy, that really hit me when I heard him say it, because that's reality, and that's a brave thing to confess on the evening news to the crowds that are out there, but it's the truth. If we can learn it sooner, that would be better. And so that our kids can learn it from us rather than from their grandparents. Grandparents, because they're often retired and have more time, have learned through experience these things. I remember seeing a bumper sticker to the effect that grandchildren are great, I should have had them first. Yeah. So folks, let's be careful. Whether we're a dad, whether we're not a dad, when we see people in our lives, and I would say those that are younger than you, children of this height or even this height, pour into their lives. From the wealth of your knowledge and experience that life has given to you, pour in positivity, encourage them. They need it today. They need it. They hear so much negativity in the world that we live in. I don't know how the world has become so negative, but it is negative. I don't even want to go down that road today, but we need to be the counter voice to that negative speak. There is hope for tomorrow. His name is Jesus. There is potential for every believer because God has created us to do great things. And so let's encourage one another.